My name is Tori Nagash, and I am the Research Initiatives Manager for ACUHO-I, and I am happy to welcome you to our Endorsed Research webinar, Supporting a Culture of Well-Being for Live-In Professionals. A little plug for our endorsed research. ACUHO-I is committed to the creation and dissemination of knowledge on campus housing, and supporting those efforts is our ACUHO-I Research Committee. They invite applications for research on issues related to campus housing, and will review and offer feedback on proposals that are submitted. And our presenter today is one of those endorsed research recipients. And so with that, I would like to turn over the mic to our presenter, and I will be here if anyone has tech issues or needs anything in the background. Please just let me know.
All right, thank you Tori, so much for that introduction, and thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Dr. Brittany McDaniel, and I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Director of Residential Life at Washington University in St. Louis. And last year, I completed my PhD at the University of Georgia in the College Student Affairs Administration program. And I was very fortunate, as Tori alluded to have my dissertation research endorsed by ACUHO-I. And they were instrumental in my ability to recruit participants for my study. Which brings us to today and why we're here together. I'm excited to share with you all a little bit about my dissertation research study, which was on staff well-being, as well as use the time we have together today to talk about how we can take care of ourselves and our teams. But first, some context about my research, which informed today's topic. My research topic explored how departments of residence life cultivate a culture of well-being for their professional live-in staff. And if after today's session you're looking for a little light reading, you can search on the University of Georgia's library website for my dissertation, which is titled "The RD is Not Well, a multi-site case study exploring residence life, live-in well-being." To give an idea of today's session, what it will look like, I'm going to first talk about for about 10 minutes and share an overview of how I came to my topic, the methodology I used, and some of my findings. From there, we'll go into breakout rooms for an icebreaker and an opportunity to begin to get to know some others in the space. And then we'll come back together where I'll share some implications from my research before returning to a breakout room for a case study activity and concluding the session by coming back together again for a larger group discussion and time for some questions. But to get to my study, I came to my dissertation research topic through much reflection on a problem that is pervasive in our field. The concept of burnout is not new by any means, yet there have been some significant changes to the work that res life professionals do, particularly in recent times, that contribute to burnout of staff in new ways. Both national events and also the rise of technology have really significantly influenced the development of younger generations, and that has altered just what the needs are that they have when they arrive to college and eventually the needs that our new professionals have when they enter into the field. And additionally, research exists that demonstrates that when employees do well in the workplace or are well, they are more productive and satisfied with their work. And so the purpose of my study was simply to just learn about the current practices that support professional live-in staff well-being and residence life, and how these practices affect the experiences of staff members. To explore this topic, my guiding research question was, how do residence life departments support a culture of well-being for their professional live-in staff? And I posed 3 supplemental questions to help me fully answer this primary research question. And these questions focused on identifying practices that support well-being, how senior leaders perceive the support that they provide to live-in staff, and how live-in staff perceive the support that they're receiving. I used 3 of Kathleen Manning's organizational frames to guide the creation of my study, and they also informed how I analyzed my data. The frames that I used were her bureaucratic frame, which emphasizes a hierarchical structure in an organization where every member has a specific job purpose and members work towards a unified mission. The organized anarchy frame describes organizations where employees feel they operate in chaos and where constant staff turnover can contribute to decisions constantly being changed depending on who is sitting at the table. And then finally, the spiritual frame, which emphasizes relationship building with the intent that people's personal values and interests should influence how they show up in the workplace and contribute to the professional work that they do. So now I'm going to shift into sharing a bit about my research design, methods, participants, and data analysis. So I started my study or constructing my research study before COVID happened. So began working on this in 2019, but had to shift the way that I ended up conducting this study. And so as a result of COVID-19, I conducted a multi-site research case study remotely. As such, I had to adapt my original methods of data collection to better fit the remote nature of my case study. Instead of going to visit sites physically, I conducted individual Zoom interviews as my primary data collection method, and I augmented this with reviewing organizational documents and doing a photo elicitation activity that served as a conversation starter with my resident director participants as my 2 secondary methods. I worked with 3 different sites in my study. I refer to these sites as New England University, Northeast University, and Southeast University. And at each site, I met with the director of the department, as well as 2 to 3 resident director positions. And at Southeast, their organizational structure allowed me to also interview a mid-level manager as well. So on this slide of what you're looking at, you'll see the demographics of the individuals that I met with, which include their time in their current position at the time of the interview, how long they had been in the field, their race and gender. And I guess just one more point of clarity as we move forward is just that, you know, as we know, there's about 272 different ways to refer to live-in staff, the entry-level professionals in our field, but for the purposes of this study, I've defined them as resident directors. And so what I appreciated about doing this study and meeting with these individuals is that all my participants were really eager to talk about this topic, and they provided much rich contextual descriptions of their experiences at their specific institution. As such, much of the extracted data was in the form of paragraphs. And then, as I mentioned before, I used Manning's bureaucratic, organized anarchy, and spiritual frame works to analyze the data both at each site, and then I went ahead and I did a cross-case analysis using the same organizational frames to identify themes. And then I also used the World Health Organization's definition of health to identify the impact of practices on well-being and make meaning of the experiences overall. And so I think it's important to have like a working definition of what I was using. And so the World Health Organization's definition of health just states that health is maintaining wellness in the physical, social, and mental dimensions and is not merely the absence of disease. And so within my dissertation, I share both the individual case findings or the within case findings, as well as the cross case findings. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to just share the themes identified through the cross case analysis of all sites. And so I was very interested when I was doing this study. One of my first questions to all my participants was, you know, why are you participating in this study? because, as I alluded to before, I think that this is a topic that can be perceived as a little bit of contentious in our field for a variety of reasons. And participants participated because they recognized the importance of taking care of themselves. And what was often referenced was this idea that, we often preach the importance of taking care of, ourselves to students, right? We encourage them to have good, healthy behaviors, but we don't always role model the same good behaviors. And then participants both at the resident director level and also at the director level participated because they believe that the current culture in which we're operating is contributing to burnout, and something needs to change because our work is just not allowing our staff to fully take care of themselves. And so now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and break down the findings by each of Manning's frames, and then we'll do our first activity. And so the first frame or the first theme focuses on bureaucratic influences. And I used a participant's quote that really gets to the heart of what was shared across interviews. And this is, "The system makes it impossible to do what's right." So in the past several years, as many of us can resonate with on this call right now, there has been a steady increase of demands of what it means to serve students on a campus. Directors in my study remarked of just how much the RD role has changed since they were RDs, which was, anywhere from 15 to 20 years ago, with today's resident directors expected to just manage more in terms of crisis response, continuing to provide quality customer service, and more due to just the student facing nature of their roles. Something that the directors shared in their interviews were that, they recognize these changes, but often feel like they have little control, given that the demands of what the work needs to happen is coming from those, whether it's above them in the department, depending on how they're structured, or, even outside of the department. So from external campus partners, from those way above them, of telling them what the work needs to happen. And the other point with this theme was that while salary and general benefits to staff matter, many of the resident director participants said that even if they were paid more, it wouldn't make their workload justifiable. And so RDs really perceive both the magnitude and the breadth of their workload to negatively affect their ability to take care of themselves. The second theme focusing on the organized anarchy framework, which can be summarized by the participant quote of, "We talk a good game, but we absolutely suck at it ourselves." So common across many of the experiences of participants was the notion that we practice balance and self-care to the students we work with, but we don't always do this ourselves. And something that makes this really hard is just the idea that campus partners lack understanding of what the RD role is on their campus and view resident directors as these staff members who can just help out at the snap of a finger. And so I really enjoyed, as I mentioned, like everyone that I met with, but one of my favorite participants to talk to, she was so witty, was Emma. And Emma really emphasized how much we suck at like practicing balance and self-care ourselves because of the demands made from campus partners and the leaders above us. And I think the quote that's on this screen really encapsulates this by sharing, it's so hard to be a caring leader, especially right now in this season of COVID, where we need to do all these things and do it with less staff and do it with less money and less time. And I think that that's probably, once again, something else that maybe many of us on this call can resonate with right now. So Emma felt this intense friction as a director between wanting to do the right thing, but not being able to all the time because of the external pressures on her campus, which required her staff to, carry more of a load in terms of supporting students. And despite being a director in her department, she didn't always feel like she had much leverage to push back. And as a result, the resident directors often felt these effects and, often categorized themselves both at her institution and at other institutions as these catch-all employees for the institution. And then finally, my third theme, spiritual influences, focuses on this framework, and can really be summarized by the participant quote of putting value in the things that staff value. What was not a surprise for at least me in talking with participants was the value and importance that they placed on getting to know their staff and colleagues as people first. Participants felt that it was from forming relationships with others that they developed a greater awareness of how someone might approach a work issue, and they were more understanding when they felt frustrated with a decision or action that a specific person might be making, because they were able to use this individual context. And additionally, recognizing how busy our work can be, live-in staff observed and valued seeing their departmental leaders practicing healthy behaviors, because it allowed them to develop an understanding of how they can set healthy boundaries and take care of themselves. All right. So now, before I go into sharing about the implications for my study, I want to break it up and have everybody be able to spend some time getting to know others in the space. And so what we're about to do is to go into our first breakout room conversation. And you'll have about 6 minutes with the others in your space. And I invite you to share the following. So it's on the screen, so feel free to screenshot this if you need it as a reference, but to, simply share your name and your pronouns, and if you feel comfortable, the institution you're currently at. And then a question that I invite you all to discuss is, just from what has been shared so far in the presentation, what has resonated with you, and or like thinking about just your home institution, what's resonated, from the findings that were shared. So it can be either to you individually or just what you think in the context of where you currently work. And so, as I mentioned, you'll have 6 minutes when you get to the breakout rooms to connect with your group, and then we'll come back together in this space. But before Tori sends everybody out, any questions? Wonderful. All right, so we'll see you back here at about 3:26. Awesome. Thank you. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had a nice time connecting with either new colleagues and or connecting with familiar faces. You'll be spending a little bit more time with those that you're with in just a little bit to talk about the case study, which I believe has been shared in the chat, but we'll share it again. But now I want to move on to talking about the next section in terms of implications from my study. And so in my dissertation, I described a number of implications based on the findings of my study. But for this presentation, I'm sharing just a few of the highlights on what I think are practical recommendations that can be made on a divisional or institutional level, as well as departmental level, along with a couple ideas around future research topics. And so based on the themes, especially the theme around this lack of understanding by campus partners about the work that RDs do, and feeling like catch-all employees at an institution, I have two divisional level recommendations to make. The first is, this is expansive of any functional area within the division, is to engage staff in an activity where they rewrite their position descriptions using their experience to inform how they would allocate time and identify responsibilities. So this could be in that in a way such as a time study activity, or it could be done in a different method. But really this idea of allowing people to provide, in writing, how do they actually spend their time? And how does that compare to their existing position description versus not? From there, a work group can be convened with different, with representation across the division and maybe elsewhere in the institution that examine similarities and differences across offices, as well as identify what are needs that exist on that particular campus that the institution must continue to offer to its students, and what are areas of work that staff do that add meaning to the student experience and may or may not be needed to be successful in the operations of the institution. The work group can provide recommendations for how areas of work may need to be shifted just within the division, what work might need further conversations on its continued merit at the institution, and then share any new needs that have arisen from the audit. And then the next suggested implication stems from an idea that a resident director participant had, and this is more on an institutional level. Your department could, explore connecting with your university HR office to create a section during all new employee onboarding that just shares more explicitly about student services roles, particularly how new employees in various areas can connect and work with resident directors. I think it's important to, HR to be mindful about how they're communicating this information. So that way it's done in a way that makes it clear that resident directors are staff members who are a conduit to students and can help answer questions or share resources to students. But it should be clear to new employees that resident directors are not staff who can take on additional responsibilities just because support is needed in other offices. And then on a departmental level, a couple of recommendations is consider how you can adapt how the resident director position is structured. And so while an RD could still be assigned as the contact for a specific residential community for needs that arise during the business day, there could be a cluster of resident directors within the department that focuses on staff and community development, whereas other resident directors specifically focus on managing more of the high-level care needs residential students have. So in essence, these latter resident directors might be seen as like pseudo case managers. And so, if exploring something like this, I think it's also important to take into consideration just the educational backgrounds and the practical experiences that you're seeking in candidates for these vacant positions. And then that leads me to my next recommendation, which is just to consider, reconsider potentially recruiting practices that you have. And this includes revisiting the relevancy of your existing position descriptions, asking for feedback from current staff on the relevancy of the position descriptions to the work that they're doing, and then retooling the interview process to better reflect and give perspective to what does it mean to be an RD at your institution. I think that I have it in italics at the bottom because I think it's connected to this, but a little bit different as well. But I think, grad programs also play a role in supporting with the recruitment process. And I think about how programs can really coach their students on how to ask questions that really help them understand and suss out the culture of the institution that they're interviewing at. And then, as noted by all the participants in my study, another recommendation is to really be intentional with how you cultivate and maintain relationships with staff. How do you show your investment to your staff with this idea that they're people first and they're an employee second? In my study, something that resident director participants also talked about was how they held their peers accountable. And so this included holding their peers accountable, in terms of encouraging them to step away from email, being able to use their flex time. And so really what I learned from this is not only is there great value in being able to cultivate these personal relationships in a hierarchical structure, but it's also important to cultivate this culture where staff can hold their peers accountable as well. And then another area to focus on enhancing relationships is through how you tell your story. So this kind of also connects back to, once again, just a lack of understanding of the RD position on a campus. And so really thinking critically about how do you communicate what your resident directors do to campus partners as a tool to revisit your partnership expectations and, I think also strengthen in some ways your working relationship with these groups of individuals and, hopefully having that byproduct effect of then having a positive effect on your relationships with your staff within your department as, they see you advocating for them in these spaces. And then just a couple ideas around future research. Once again, go into much more depth in my dissertation. But one area to critically examine is the roles and purposes of the resident director in the 21st century. And so not much has been removed from the position since the 1980s, but much has been added to the position. And so how can we repurpose and reconceptualize what this position is to better meet student and institutional needs? And then considering this in the theme of campus partners, once again, not fully understanding the role of RDs, research should also occur that explores how departments can collaborate in tangible ways that is both efficient and continues to meet the needs of students and other stakeholders. I think Kazar and Lester have some great research out there around collaboration, but I think really the emphasis here is on, how does that look in practice and what are tangible ways, specifically residence life departments that are very general in nature can go about doing this work. And then finally, for the few participants in my study who identified as a person of color, their experience is very different than their white colleagues. And so there's need to conduct more intentional research on the experiences of live-in staff who hold marginalized identities and learn how their sense of belonging and overall experience is impacted. Okay. So in the chat, there's a link to a SharePoint document that has the case study on this slide, but we're going to spend the rest of the day participating in a case study activity and having a discussion. So you're going to go back into your breakout rooms, ideally with those that you were there before, but there might be one or two new faces to it. And you'll have about 10 minutes to discuss the case study on the screen. At the end of the case study, there are 2 questions to discuss. What steps do you take to heal and move forward as a leader in this situation? And then how do you do so as a team? In the first question, focusing on this idea of leader, I think it's important to name that all of us on this call most likely are, if we're working in a department, are a leader in some capacity on our campuses, whether it is being a leader to students, to RAs, and or professional staff. And so I think really consider that question within your locus of control. And then I invite you to take notes of what you all discussed in your breakout rooms, because as we come back together, we'll have a discussion and be able to share out some salient, ideas and points that were discussed. And so once again, any questions before breaking out again? Wonderful. Okay, so Tori is about to open up the breakout rooms. I figured that's where you were at, Don Mitchell.
Yes, when I saw it on the calendar, because they sent it in the chat, I'm like, yes, I'm excited to go because I wanted to see you present. And then I looked on my calendar, I'm like, oh, a new RA interview. Like, oh.
So yeah, I mean, luckily it's being recorded, so if you are interested.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I will definitely be watching it later on.
I will not. But
all right, Brittany, everyone should be back.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Tori. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you all were able to have a nice discussion in your breakout rooms. And so now what we're going to do, I'm going to take it off of screen share and just allow us to have this time to have a conversation about, what did you all discuss? What were steps that you all in this situation, which once again, I think probably resonates with many of us, would you take to heal and move forward, whether it's as a leader or, with the team that you work on? Yeah, so I'll open it up to you all.
I'll jump in here. Deanna C. Hughes, I use the she, her pronoun series. I am currently at Florida State University, Tallahassee, Florida's campus. But I was briefly sharing with the group I was in that self-preservation was very real for me. So when I realized that COVID wasn't trying to go anywhere, at the top of this new year, after having some conversations with my supervisor, I was like, hey, can I just take my time? Like, just because time throughout the entire semester, like I know proactively the ebbs and flows since I've been in housing for a while. So can I block it off for the whole semester? And that just motivated me to stay in love with what I enjoy doing, but make sure I don't burn out and become like bitter with folks asking for so much, and not really taking into account that I have a family. I actually enjoy engaging in the community. Like I like to sleep, I like to eat. So it was reassuring to know that she was like, yes. And just so you know, the executive director is telling us to like, get your time, like take the time because it's there. I mean, you don't need the permission, but like, I was like, well, this is housing. So even hearing the executive director start to make that a thing and communicate in a head staff meeting that, hey, y'all, we see you, we know you're doing a lot, but the time is there for a reason. So I'm trying to be okay and not feel guilty about do not disturb when I'm taking that time away. And then proactively communicating with the student leaders I supervise and advise so that they understand, okay, Deanna says she's away. So we can't call her or knock on her door or text her because she will not respond. Yeah, but that's definitely helped me with healing and not feeling like I have to jump on the real reality of a lot of people transitioning out as a result of it not being sufficient for the holistic health and wellness that, we all need.
Thanks, Diana, for sharing that. And I appreciate the remark you made around not feeling guilt, because that was something else that really came up with my participants, was this idea of feeling guilty about taking time away and not working when they were taking time away.
Hi, my name is Justin. I go by he, him, his pronouns. But I was in a group with Hillary, Ben, Gina, and Ajanti. And some things that we talked about was just recognizing that it is a hard time right now for everyone within our team, you yourselves, as well as like the residents and their family members. But then seeing that we are able to, or seeing if we could work with our supervisors to see if there are some moments where like we can kind of put back some of the less immediate tasks or responsibilities, whether it is like planning for the next academic year or just planning in general, and seeing like how we can focus and put our resources more focused to the moments of crisis that we do experience with students or that they need more support from us at that time, and kind of just focusing on that conversation with your supervisor to see where it leads to. But then, yes, also reaching out to campus partners to see if like they have any resources or opportunities, and seeing like where we can support them in those areas as well. But I really like the conversation leading into talking about like the RA's experience as supervisors for them. Talking about like recognizing that it is hard for them as well, and recognizing that and noticing that like everyone wants recognition in different ways. So then we started talking a little bit about like their love languages, and then seeing like what they want to take away from it, but then also asking them like what support looks like to them so that we can be supportive in the way that fits their personality or things that they're wanting.
Thank you, Justin. Those are all really great points to make. And I appreciate including the RAs in this conversation too.
One of the things that I wanted to share with my group, I didn't get a chance to, but my boss always says we have an incredible ability in housing and residence life. And I think this case study highlights it. We have an incredible ability in housing residence life to make the impossible possible. as if we have magical powers to bring the student out of wherever they are and into a flourishing moment, and not realizing how heavy that weight is that we carry as staff who care so much about our students in these roles. And recognizing that we have agency to say when it's been too much for us, I think is important for our staff to know. And to also think about as we move forward, to redefine what being in community looks like for our students. So it doesn't have to be the same that it looked like before, those expectations. But as you all have said, what does success look like in our community, or what does their job description look like now in this new life we all have? So redefining that, so we're not trying to measure ourselves to standards that were 2 years ago.
Thanks, Christina. I also want to open up this time for any questions that folks may have in the space.
I have a question if that's all right. First of all, thank you for sharing your information and your dissertation. I'm going to take a look at it here this evening because I'm working on one myself. But my question was, you looked at, several of the factors affecting burnout and the things affecting our entry-level staff. As someone who recruits and works with entry-level staff, I'm curious, were there any other factors that came up in your conversation with them? Because just anecdotally, over the past several years, I've noticed that when it comes to entry-level professionals, location and family are huge factors that will either affect their decision to accept a position or affect their decision to leave a position fairly quickly. And I was just curious if if that came up at all in any of your conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that question and good luck on your dissertation. So it did in, yes, in a couple different ways. And so I think that, across the 3 institutions, something that came up, with a few of the different participants was around this idea of like high level of care that we provide to students, and what does it mean to provide customer service to students? Like these were 2 terms that were often used, and I think for the participants, they didn't really understand what this looked like until they had experience at the institution. And so and one of the institutions, they really talked about how they, one of the participants likened their roles to being a concierge service for student after hours. And so whether it was like taking, dropping off like towels and linens to a student who arrived in the middle of the night, or, just answering a call from the parents or family. And I think, at another institution, they talked about how they had a really robust crisis response protocol. And it's one that they presented on nationally and that has been adapted at other institutions. And they're really proud of it. And it sounds really great. But once again, there was this, sentiment of like, if I'd known what it had meant to do crisis work at this institution, that could have affected my decision. So I think that the crisis work right now is a really big piece of it, is really understanding what does that entail, and then the customer service second. And then the third thing that I think connects to the recruitment practices is, to the point that you made at the end around location and salary. But I think along with that is the on-campus amenities, right? And so while there's a hot debate in my different conversations on whether on-campus apartment is seen as compensation or not. What was something that came up was this idea of inequity amongst the staff apartments on a campus. So one campus talked about how some of their staff apartments had dishwashers, but then others didn't. And so I think, really being able to be upfront with what are the housing accommodations that are going to be provided to that staff member.
Brittany, I just want to say thank you for sharing your research with us. And as someone who went through the PhD journey too, not easy, quite a kind of there's a lot happening there. So thank you for taking the time and the energy to share it with us. And I really love your tangible ideas. You know, one that I was latching onto a lot was the, are there different types of live-in RD roles? And I think we've talked about that a lot as a profession with our paraprofessional student leaders. But truthfully, I think that's a huge opportunity to be thinking about beyond just the basic case manager and other roles that we commonly talk about, which are important. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I think yesterday, this was related to a topic at the state of the profession, the ACUHO-I state of the profession, about just the complexity and the dynamics that are happening in our workforce. So I would just say keep, to the degree that you're able, keep sharing those good nuggets and ideas. And I look forward to actually digging in and reading more about your findings, because I think it's not only timely, it's just really valuable to know that you took the time to go through the rigor of empirical research to help us be better in our roles.
Thanks, Hillary. I appreciate you coming today. It's good to see you, and I appreciate that, just the validation of that. I want to be conscious of time, and I recognize it's at the top of the hour, and so folks might need to jump off. But if you are able to stay on and you have more questions, and happy to continue this conversation for a little bit longer. But also want to, give the release of it's okay to leave if you need to. Awesome, woohoo!